trade. You see it all around the world. And our challenge is to make sure that the people who want to divide America back into us and them, instead of what we can do together, don't turn out with greater intensity than we do. There's a reason that if there's a single country on earth where the voters of hope should triumph over the voters of fear, it should be America. So the first thing I want to say is we need more voters, and voter registration's open until October the 11th. So go register somebody between now and October the 11th. The second thing I'd like to do is just make a simple argument based on what I just did. I was asked by the family of the late president of Israel, Shimon Peres, to come to Israel to his memorial service to talk about what he meant to people who were not Israeli. He was 93 years old. And not long before he died, he did an interview with Charlie Rose, and he said, "What do you want your legacy to be?" You know what he said? "I prefer to think more about tomorrow than yesterday." In other words, to heck with my legacy, what are we going to do now? And that's what we all need to be thinking about. Not long before he died, he went with the prime minister of Israel who defeated him in a close race 20 years ago. And he just determined to make a friend out of him, and they kept working together, and they went to a dedication of a new high-tech park in Israel. Shimon Peres, at 93, had been talking to me about that project for 15 years because he wanted people to have a good job. He believed that we could do unlimited things together. You can win a lot of elections on us and them, but you can't get a darn thing done once you get there. So here's what I want to say about the economy. First of all, the Democrats have a pretty good argument. I made it 4 years ago for President Obama, but we have now had 79 straight months of job growth for the first time in decades. And as a result, finally, this year we had the biggest increase in personal income we've had in a long time. And for the first time since I left office, the biggest gains were in the bottom 80% of the workforce. So, is this a change election? Yes, it is, and it should be. But the issue is, what are we going to do? What kind of change do we need? We need to return to broadly shared prosperity. And you got to have plans to do that. Now, since 1961, since John Kennedy was elected, at the end of President Obama's term, we will have had 28 years of Republicans and 28 years of Democrats. What's the job score? Right now, it's 52 million jobs for the Democrats and 24 for the Republicans. So we can go back to trickle-down economics if we're mad enough. Oh boy, I want to see somebody slap those immigrants around. I want to see somebody badmouth someone else. I want to vote for somebody that never paid taxes so he didn't waste a nickel of it. I'm so mad. Look, I'm not minimizing the mad. But this election depends on the scales that we all wake up with every day. You know, every day, don't we? We wake up with scales inside. We feel a little better, we feel a little worse. We feel a little more hopeful, we feel a little more worried. So, do we want anger or answers? Do we want resentment or empowerment? And do we want to reach the world with walls or bridges? That's it. That's the whole thing. So, look at where we are. Here's how this will affect you. your family, your community, your life. For all of our problems, we're outperforming any other big, older economy in the world. None of these other countries have had 79 months of constant job growth. So for all of our disappointments, you got to compare us to the competition in the world economy. President Obama, 10 years from now, people look back and say, it's amazing. They did everything in Congress they could not to cooperate with him, and he still produced good results for the American people in the world. Having lost it, I can tell you, youth matters. It matters. It's a big deal. Second, we have the best system of education and training in the world. We just got to make college affordable, the debt repayable, and we have to redignify skills training and reward people who invest in people who don't need 4 years education, college education. Thirdly, we have the best science and technology base in the world, and that's generating a world of jobs. And we should be doing more. Fourthly, we rank first or second in the world in the ability to generate electricity from the sun, the wind, and other clean resources, which will make, this is unbelievable, but power will be cheap as dirt within 10 years. And materials and transportation will have more to do with manufacturing costs than labor. So we can get any kind of manufacturing job in the world back to America if we really work on it because of our advantages. Nobody can claim these advantages but us. And shame on us if we don't take advantage of it. But you got to get the answers, not the anger. You got to empower everybody to be part of this economy, not just let them go off with their resentments, no matter how legitimate they are. And we can't do us and them. We got to do bridges, not walls. That's a simple thing. So, the good news is there are clear, achievable, affordable responses to the challenges we face. We need more jobs, higher income, and more upward mobility. I just talked to a fellow that wrote a book about Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War, and he said, with another guy, they're both friends of mine, so I'll make full disclosure, but he said, I didn't think there was anything left to be learned, but I realized that one of the reasons Lincoln fought the Civil War is that in the North, there was no power elite, there was no slave labor, and it was the greatest opportunity that had ever been created in the world up to that time for ordinary people to start out poor and get into the middle class. We've got to do that again. We've got to make a middle class life available to all Americans. So there's only one candidate with a plan to do that. Hillary says first thing we got to do when interest rates are lower than inflation, as they have been all these years, but they won't be forever if we keep growing like this. We've got to take advantage to rebuild our roads, our bridges, our ports, our airports, our mass transit. We ought to put up 500 million solar panels in the next 4 years and make them all in America. We ought to do these things, and we can pay for it. I'll say more about that in a minute. Second thing we need to do is to change the banking rules enough to make small business lending easy again for people. That's the number one problem now we've got. This Dodd-Frank law did a good job in trying to rein in Wall Street to keep Wall Street from bankrupting Main Street again. But it didn't do enough to make a Main Street economy again. To do that, you got to have small business lending. 2/3 of all the jobs created in America in the last 20 years have come from small businesses. The third thing we got to do is aggressively develop our manufacturing capacity. Not because we can put everybody to work in manufacturing. It's the most productive part of every economy, which means every year fewer people can produce more stuff. But because every manufacturing job is responsible for 2.5 more jobs in America. That's why we need it, and it's important. And we've got to invest in the science and technology capacity of our universities and their ability to spin off jobs. I'll give you one example from a good ways away. In Florida, they now have the third biggest undergraduate institution in the country behind the University of Michigan and Ohio State. You know what it is? Nobody knows. It's the University of Central Florida. You know why? Because they decided to concentrate on computer simulation. And they got Disney World, the Universal Entertainment Park, Global Entertainment Arts Video Game Division, and NASA and the Defense Department spend $5 billion a year there. So they figured out that's a lot of computer simulation. That is, it's cheaper to teach somebody to drive a tank, fly an airplane, or go up in space in a rocket on a simulator than the real deal. It's also safer. So they have created, listen to this, because of the university research budget, 100 more companies, new companies there. There are more jobs than anybody can shake a stick at. We can do this everywhere in America. So it's pretty straightforward what we need to do. You do all that stuff, you have more jobs, higher income, more upward mobility. If we fix the education problem, which means we need to make college affordable, the debt repayable, community college free, and skills training more available to people who don't need a four-year degree to get a middle-class income. Now, one of the great untold stories in this election, which has been dominated by press coverage over insults or tax evasion or abuse, family foundations or whatever, that has nothing to do with how your life is going to turn out. This has to do with how your life's going to turn out. The most remarkable thing that happened at the Democratic Convention was that Bernie Sanders and Hillary agreed on a common education and training plan. And here's how it works. And they agreed on how to pay for it. Free tuition at all public universities for everybody, family with a family income of $125,000 or less. That's 85% of us. Number one. Number two, free tuition at community college for everybody. Number three, debt-free graduation for 100% of us by increasing Pell Grants, work-study funds, and all that. Number four, for people who already have debt, first let everybody refinance. One of the great scandals of American life is the only debt you cannot refinance is a college debt. Nobody can justify it. I met a woman that I've been doing business with for, 12 years. A few months ago, I went in to buy a pair of jeans, and I knew she had a son graduating from one of New York's public schools. I said, "How's your boy doing?" She said, "Great. He's made great grades. He's going to get a good job. Everything's fine." I said, "Does he have any debt?" She said, "Yeah, quite a bit." I said, "What's the interest rate on the debt?" 9%, she said. So then I said, "Do you have a home mortgage?" She said, "Of course." I said, "Did you refinance when the interest rates dropped?" She said, "Sure, I did." I said, "What's your mortgage rate?" She said, "Under 4." Now you tell me how it's fair for a middle-aged person to have a mortgage under 4% and somebody just starting out life trying to make their way to have a college debt financed at 9%. If we did that overnight, 20 million Americans would save more than $2,000 apiece. And then the final part of this plan is you can pay it back even if you owe $200,000 for a medical degree, let's say, no matter what you owe. You can pay it back as a fixed percentage of your income, and no matter how much you owe, you can never be required to pay more than 10% of your after-tax income a month. And if you don't pay it off after 20 years, the rest is forgiven. If you take a public service job, it's forgiven after 10 years. And this is the final thing. If you start a small business, you get 3 years relief from debt repayment while you're building your business, so young people can start businesses again and get credit. Now, this is what this campaign ought to be about. How's it going to change your life? Do you agree with that? mean, I'm sort of old-fashioned. I happen to think the election ought to be about the voters and their future and what they're going to do. The fundamental other problem we have to face, you can see in the Wells Fargo bank scandal, in Mr. Trump's bankruptcies and apparently paying no taxes, and in what happened to Carrier Air Conditioning in Indiana. So, and if you want a simple sentence, one of the things that's holding back equal opportunity in America is that financing, which we all need. We need a vibrant finance sector. But you cannot let the finance tail wag the economic dog. And when the tail wags the dog will never move in the right direction. The dog will go around in circles, and only the tail will like it. Now, right? That is what the problem is. So I'll give you an example. So Wells Fargo first was one of the most admired banks in America because they didn't go all in on the subprime mortgage deal and didn't play a major role in the crash. But it turned out they decided to make their money by opening all these anonymous accounts and never telling their customers and overcharging them the fees. So they didn't commit one sin and they did commit another. Why? Because they're all being dominated by these rich shareholders who demand a profit in a year and a day, and they pay the chief executives based on that so they can sell their stock whenever they want, and if they hold it a year and a day, they get a lower tax rate. That's what happened. In Mr. Trump's case, his casinos failed, so lots of people got hurt, but he didn't because he continued to live a lifestyle and didn't pay any taxes or nowhere near enough. In the Carrier case, in some ways the worst of all. You remember what happened there was in Indiana, but they had a unionized workforce. They laid off 2,100 people. They said they're going to move their products to Mexico. Production, because the labor was cheap. What they didn't say was this. That division, which makes furnaces, not air conditioning, made $2.9 billion last year. And the profit margins were increasing. And the union said, look, this is peanuts. We can save you $65 million a year. We'll just change the work schedules. Let us do that. And they still didn't do it. You know why? Because they were in the grip of the money tail. And the rich shareholders wanted their money back in a hurry and refused to give the president of the company his bonus, even though the company was pulling a lot, unless they got their money back on time. And the only way they thought they could get it was to break the union. So they threw 2,100 people under the bus. So what does Hillary want to do about that? Stop the tail from wagging the dog. In other words, say, if you leave the country under those circumstances, there should be a tariff on your products coming back. If you leave the country under those circumstances, you should have to pay back anything you got from the federal, state, and local governments. And why are we giving this super low tax rate if you hold the stock for a year and a day? She wants to raise the taxes on stock sales in a hurry and lower them for people who hold their stock for 5 years or longer so these companies can start working for their workers and their customers and their communities again. Think about it. In the Carrier case, the workers got hosed. In the Wells Fargo case, the customers got hosed. Everybody gets hosed but the money tail. That is what is holding this country back. So, Hillary says, this is really important. I'm not just for raising corporate taxes. I want to lower them if they help America grow. So, lower taxes for companies that share their profits with their employees. Lower taxes for companies that keep training their workers so they become more productive and more valuable to the company and more able to get higher wages. And lower taxes if they invest in places that have been left out and left behind, from poor neighborhoods in Detroit and Flint to coal country to Indian country. You want to make lower taxes, put your money where America needs a job, and we will lower your taxes. Now, I think that's a pretty good idea. And I know it'll work because we did a smaller version of that before I left office. It's called the New Markets Tax Credit. Hillary proposes to expand it and make it easier to access, but just in the decade that ended in 2013, it applied to areas with unemployment rates well above the national average and incomes well below the national average. We created almost 1 million jobs in 1,000 sites. Every corporation that did that, every business got lower taxes because they put America to work. And that's what we need. Put America to work. Now, the other thing we got to do if we want to do this is break out of this us and them mentality. We need criminal justice reform in this country. It's wrong. I don't care what your race is. How would you feel if you were terrified to have your son go out after sunset? And I don't care what your race is. How would you feel if there were no police in your neighborhood if you had a crime problem? Right? So we need the police and we need the reform. And she's the only candidate that's offered a detailed plan for that. Hillary met with a bunch of police chiefs not very long ago, and it was a multiracial, interesting array of them. You know what they asked her for? They said everybody should wear body cameras, we should all be trained, but we need mental health in our community because we don't want these kids to die. So she did that. This is really important. It's crazy to keep young people committed to nonviolent offenses in prison so long and then let them out without any job training, any ability to get a job, dramatically or vote, and increase the chances they'll go back to jail. She wants to fix that. This is important. She wants immigration reform for the same reason the Republicans used to. Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush were in favor of giving people who'd worked here a long time, were totally law-abiding, had their kids in our schools, were paying taxes, a path to citizenship. Never letting anybody get ahead of those who waited in line, but not dividing the country over something that would be an economic disaster. If you tried to send 11.5 million people home tomorrow, and most of them were working, paying taxes, and contributing to their community, first it would cost $100 billion, and second it would cause a recession. So nobody is talking about legitimizing criminal behavior and all those things Mr. Trump talks about. We're talking about the way the world works. I got a little deli that I go to. It's my own focus group. It's less than a mile from my house. It's run by a German American, and all of his employees, as nearly as I can determine, are Polish Americans and people from the Dominican Republic and Ecuador. And they're all there working together. All they want to know is, what can we do to get incomes up and more jobs? But they don't want to fight with each other. We're fortunate we have a low unemployment rate, about 4% in our county. Most of the anti-immigration feeling in America is in places that don't have a lot of immigrants. We got to quit fighting over this and say, look, this is not about law-abiding and non-law-abiding. This is about trying to normalize relations in America so we can get it on with taking advantage of having the youngest, most diverse workforce in the world and put America back to work and restore upward mobility. We can do this now. And I guess I ought to say this. I think it's pretty important to elect a president who will put people on the Supreme Court that want to expand voting rights, not restrict them. I think it's important to put people on the Supreme Court who don't much like that Citizens United decision and don't think corporations are people. This is really important. I noticed one of the things that her opponent contributed to as a charity was the Citizens United PAC. You really think that's going to change your life for the better? So here's what I want you to think about. Spend the next 30-something days asking people to vote for Hillary because she's the only person that's got a plan that will create jobs, raise incomes, increase upward mobility, reduce inequality, and reduce all this poison that's in our political system. And she's the only person, in spite of how bad they've been to her, who has consistently gotten Republican as well as Democratic support for every single thing she ever passed in Congress as a senator or a Secretary of State. She's kind of like Shimon Peres was. It doesn't matter what you say about her. She knows it's all politics. She leaves the door open. If you're in it for the American people instead of yourself, it doesn't matter what they call you. If you need their vote, you leave the door open. And you just keep working. Now look, this is what I think politics is about. We are in a position to have a 21st century version of shared prosperity for the first time since the 1990s, which was the first time since the 1960s that we were all growing together. People ask me all the time, what are you proudest of? And I said, I'm proudest of the fact that for the first time in 50 years, in percentage terms, the incomes of the bottom 20% went up more than the incomes of the top 20%. And we all grew together. We've tried trickle-down economics 3 times now. It actually did work for a little while under President Reagan. It was unequal, but it worked because we never had been on a sugar high before. It was the first time we had ever run massive deficits in peacetime in a normal economy. But it couldn't be sustained. You've got to invest and grow this economy with the goal of making sure the finance tail doesn't wag the economic dog. That you invest in small businesses, that you invest in our economic future in terms of education and training and the things we know will create jobs. But I'm telling you, I've done this now for half my life, working on helping people make a living at home and around the world. I got up every day for 8 years when I was president and thought about how what I would do would affect you. We learned a lot about trade. We learned, and she's talked about, for example, when you make a trade deal, first of all, if you don't enforce it, you shouldn't make it. We had more enforcement. That's why we still kept gaining manufacturing jobs. Secondly, there are always going to be things outside the trade deal you've got to be willing to act against, especially currency manipulation and barriers besides tariffs. I remember once a guy I was negotiating, trying to make a deal with, looked at me with a straight face and said, we can't let you sell skis in our country because we think they're 2 inches too wide. And I realized that this is not like it seems. The third thing is you can't let people do what Carrier did unless you're willing to move against them. If somebody is losing money in America, but they've been a good citizen and they have to go someplace to make a living, we should wish them well. But if they're making money in America and they're packing up and leaving us behind because they want to break a union or give their richest shareholders more money quicker, we should say, no, we're going to take the gains away from you if you do that. That is Hillary's position. So, what I want more than anything else is for the American people to believe that our country is the best positioned country for the 21st century. I want people to believe we can have shared prosperity again. We can have upward mobility again. That's the change we need. You are going to get change. The question is, what kind of change are you going to get? So I ask you to go out and talk about this. The last thing I want to say is this. When I was asked to speak at the Democratic Convention this year, I decided just to tell you the story of the Hillary I knew. Because it's inconceivable that a person who started her life out trying to help children and families when she could have had a big fancy job and spent her entire life trying to help other people live their lives better. But someone who would take on in this campaign the cause of the mothers of the movement and call for sensible background checks on guns. And I know it's controversial in Michigan, but it's not controversial any place on earth except America. Because people's lives have been filled with all these dishonest claims. Oh, the Democrats, they're coming for your guns. They're coming for your guns. They said that about me. And we banned assault weapons. We had a limit on ammunition clips. And let me say this. Nobody in Michigan missed a day in the deer woods, failed to be able to show up at a sports shooting contest, or was unable to protect their families in their own home. It is a bunch of bull. We need to grow up and do what we need to do. When I was governor of Arkansas, we had to basically close the schools on the first day of deer season in half the state because nobody was going to show up anyway. Talking about the power of culture, my chief financial officer, the number one officer in state government, was an African-American guy who wanted to play professional baseball and got hurt. He took off the first day of deer season every year. He said, I'll take this job as long as I can have the first day of deer season off. I'll never forget when Dick Cheney got involved in that shooting incident. I'll never forget, this guy told me, one day I said I'd go turkey hunting because I'd never been before. He said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I said, are you kidding? You hunt everything that walks. He said, not turkey. I said, why? He said, you know how you got to dress, don't you? You got to wear camouflage, gloves, and a little thing over your head that looks like a male version of a burqa where you look this. He said, that's because turkeys can see better than people. But people got the guns. That doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not going to do that. Otherwise, he was all in. In other words, Hillary doesn't want anybody's gun. She just doesn't want anybody to get killed by somebody who shouldn't have a gun in the first place. So, that's what I want you to go talk to people about. The big difference in this campaign on all these personal things, you need to make it simple. Her strongest supporters are the people who know her best. People who grew up with her, the people she lived and worked with in Arkansas who've gone all over this country at their own expense. Many of them could barely afford it to campaign for her. She hadn't lived there in a long time. People she served as a senator from New York, people she worked with in the State Department. Followed by people who've had business dealings with her opponent. They're her second strongest groups of her supporters. I never thought I'd see all these Republicans who spent their lives defending this country and national security. A huge number of them said they couldn't vote for him. Several of them have endorsed her. USA Today had never before issued an endorsement in a newspaper. They endorsed it. The Arizona Republic has been a newspaper since 1890. They just endorsed their first Democrat. The Cincinnati, Ohio player, the Inquirer, has not endorsed a Democrat since Woodrow Wilson in 1916. They just endorsed her. The Dallas Morning News has not endorsed a Democrat since the World War II, when they said, you know, we probably shouldn't change presidents in the middle of World War II. They just endorsed it. There's a reason for this. So let people make up their own mind about her opponent. I want you to go out there and tell people why you ought to vote for her, why it will change our lives for the better. We can have broadly shared prosperity. We can have upward mobility. We can have a decent retirement. We can recreate a strong middle class and give poor people a chance to work their way into it. And we can do it in a country that is safer and more united, where every kid's got a chance to go to college or find a decent job with proper training. That's what we've got to do. This is not rocket science. It is achievable, and we are so close. We are so close. All you got to do is go out and make sure we claim the promise of this new century.